I gathered petals in my hand. I felt their velvet, soft and bland. I saw the soft colors in my palm, looking not unlike some lucky charm. I raised them to my lips and whispered words for you alone, then placed the petals upon your bed and stood alone, this moment of dread. I turned and walked away. My words, my love, are with you, I pray. That's a poem by Lou Simcoe. Wow, isn't that just tell you so much? It just paints this picture, right? You know, there's also this song by the band Perry called If I Die Young. And some of the lyrics go like this. If I die young, bury me in satin, lay me down on a bed of roses, sink me in the river at dawn, send me away with the words of a love song. When I die, that's the formula I'd like to use. Bury me in satin? Check. Lay me down on a bed of roses? Check, check. Sink me in the river at dawn? Yes, please. Send me away with the words of a love song? How perfect. You know, that also conjures up this image. There's this painting of Ophelia from Hamlet by British artist Sir John Everett Millais. It's such a romantic view of death. She's floating on the river, surrounded by flowers and billows of fabric. There's a peaceful, serene look on her face. And although I know the plot of Hamlet and Ophelia's tragic end, I can't help but be mesmerized by this vision of death. There's a romance to it. My guest today is Dawn Walsh, a woman who specializes in honoring those who have died with community-centered wakes and home funerals and shrouding ceremonies, bringing some romance to after-death care. She's the executive director of Lily House, a community home for living and dying in Wellfleet, Massachusetts. And at the time of this interview, she's in San Antonio, getting ready to present a workshop to the ABODE community about the work that she does. I'm so happy to have her on our podcast. And I don't know about you all, but I'm intrigued about learning more about this kind of work. Welcome to Before You Go, the official podcast of ABODE Contemplative Care for the Dying. At ABODE, our mission is that we live in a world where death is not feared, and we live fully until we die. And we'd like to make that happen before we go. I'm Natalie Buster, yoga, volunteer, and doula director at ABODE in San Antonio, Texas. Welcome to Before You Go.
Hi, thank you, Natalie. It's great to be here with you.
Oh, look at you. So Dawn is at ABODE right now, and she's in our meditation room surrounded by butterflies.
Yeah, it's really, really lovely to be here. Yes.
Yeah. And I think it just really sets the stage for the kind of work that you do and also what you'll be presenting to us tonight at ABODE. So you're you're getting ready to do this event for us. What do you want our viewers or our listeners to know about the kind of work that you do and what the lucky San Antonians will be learning from you tonight?
Well, like you mentioned at the Lily House, a social model hospice home in Wellfleet, we offer after death care for our residents who come with us for end of life care. And one of the reasons it's particularly important for me is just as a culture, we generally, when someone says, or has a conversation about after death wishes, usually everyone just immediately goes to, oh, I want to be cremated or I want to be buried. And that's it, without really knowing that there's very sacred, special time after the last breath, but before the body disposition, the burial or the cremation, to stay present with your loved one after death and to stay in community and express love and gratitude. And so it's of the end of life work that I do. It's one of my most favorite parts of end of life care is bringing families and friends and community together in that sacred space and time after death. And just letting everyone know that there's absolutely no rush, there's no hurry. We have as much time as we want or need to stay present, to lay a loved one in honor, do ritual bathing, anointing, dressing, grooming, hair brushing, getting tucked in cozy with flowers and personal mementos, creating sacred space in the room, decluttering, creating an altar with flowers and candles and any special personal items, sometimes playing soft music, and just at the Lily House, when we have home wakes, home funerals, our residents have been laid in honor for as short as a couple of hours, a very kind of private, intimate couple of hours with the family and their loved one, to laid in honor for up to 3 days by keeping the body cool, and then having, a full on party with live music and food and drink and testimonials and people zooming in from afar, and everything in between.
That sounds so wonderful. And I think you hit the nail on the head because there is a lot of mystery and a lot of misconceptions about what we do after a loved one dies. And our culture, we see things very black and white. Like it either needs to be cremation or burial, and that the second the person takes their last breath, we got to call the ambulance, we got to call hospice and get that body taken care of. And it sounds like the work that you do and the work that you do at Lily House, you see it as a completely different experience.
Yes, absolutely. And we are enculturated to immediately pick up the phone and call somebody, and, the hospice nurse, if the loved one's on hospice. And then even sometimes the hospice nurse is trained and enculturated to immediately call the funeral home. And so it's been training for us, with our hospice partners too, to say, thank you, but we're not ready for the funeral home to be called yet. Our staff at the Lily House will call the funeral home when the family is ready. And they're like, oh, okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, and it's so important for so many reasons. In addition to what I've already shared, it really helps the family start to integrate the loss, right? They see that their loved one has died, they're staying present with it, they're integrating that experience. They're allowed time and space to continue to express words and gestures of love and of gratitude. I like to think about it as an opportunity to give thanks to the physical form that held the spirit, the soul, the consciousness. And then, if a family would like, and if the resident who passed would like, then we do the shrouding ceremonies, which we're going to do a mock shrouding ceremony tonight as part of my presentation. And again, that's a way to really integrate intentional ceremony and ritual, and to provide hands-on opportunities for family members and friends to actually express love in a physical manner, and to have that held in their muscle memory, right? That they shrouded with tender love and care their loved one, and adorned them with flowers and laid hands on them, gave them a final kiss. And then, depending on the shrouding ceremony in the family, incorporating readings or song, or, just speaking from the heart in the moment. And it's a way for us to bring after death care back into the literal hands of family and friends and community. And it becomes a heart centered human experience, as opposed to a business or financial transaction that can pay a lot of money to strangers to care for your loved one in, what I would say is the most intimate, sacred moment at the end of one's life. And the final thing I'll share as part of our after death care work, we also, when the funeral home is ready, when we are ready for the funeral home to come, We ask them to bring into the residence room a handheld stretcher. And that's another opportunity for family and friends and staff, all of us, to be hands-on and to hand carry with the handheld stretcher the person from the room down the hallway and then onto the stretcher that's kind of waiting by the door. And another opportunity at that point, that's when we do the final covering of the face with the shroud. And then we even follow the stretcher out the door, bear witness, hold space, until the funeral home car pulls away and is out of sight. So it's as intentionally hands-on as possible from beginning to the end, from the moment somebody walks into our home for care until literally the car turns a corner and we can't see them anymore.
That's so beautiful. And to me, it conjures up just so many wonderful things that you're doing for the family, because a lot of times when someone is dying, there are some images that may occur for family members or friends that they don't necessarily want to hold on to. Maybe some images of suffering, or watching the person start to fade away physically and energetically. And it seems like this ritual that you're providing gives them a chance to kind of change that narrative and create a new poetry almost.
Oh, totally. I have the best story about that. So, and yeah, you're right. I mean, when someone dying is hard work for those listeners who have helped a loved one die. It's physical. The person dying is working, they're laboring, right? There's physical work, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's social, right? And so there's a way, that there could be all of those expressions of work held in the face, right, and in the body. But once death happens, all of that is released, and there's a peace and a relaxation that comes over. And those of us who know this, a smile often forms, especially over time. And when we lay someone in honor, they're just beautiful. They're peaceful and radiant. And sometimes I've walked into the room the next day to say good morning, because say, we haven't had the home wake yet. And I'll just kind of stop in my tracks because for a nanosecond, I was like, did they really die? They're so beautiful. But anyway, going back to your point about the family, you're right. So we had a situation where the family was present at the Lily House at the time of their loved one's final breath. And there were some family members in the room, and there were some family members who were in the living room. But at any rate, they did want us to lay their loved one in honor. And I should say, we also offer family members an opportunity to help us do that if they would like. In this case, the family said, we would like you to do it. We'll just be in the living room. Let us know. So it's a couple of hours to lay someone in honor, and the family was just visiting with each other in the living room. And again, like the time just to be together in family and not like they didn't have to do anything, just be. So when the loved one was ready, the family went in, but there was one family member who was very adamant about not wanting to go in and see. In this case, it was a grandmother. I want to remember her in life. I don't want to see her after death. And I think, again, we're enculturated even to fear death after the fact as well. But his mom had gone in to see her mom, and she came out and she was sobbing and she was saying, like, she's so beautiful. She's so beautiful. You have to go see her. You have to go. Please go see her. You can't believe how beautiful she is. And she was just beside herself in the beauty of the experience. And so the grandson said, okay, fine, I'll go in. And then, of course, I mean, he was like, oh my gosh, thank you, thank you. I never would have done this without you and without this opportunity. And I think about the power of that moment for him. And what I also think about is the power of that moment in its multi-generational effects and rippling effects, that so much of what we're doing at ABODE and at the Lily House is modeling for each other and for our community what it looks like to be present for end of life together as community, and how we can model that for each other and open up an invitation.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think There's such a desire now, I think, because we live in such a technologically attached world where everything is, on our phones and we're constantly being pinged and zinged and all of that. There's a real desire to return to a more analog, hands-on, visceral experience. And I can imagine that at end of life and this kind of ritual where people are literally laying hands on their loved one. They're literally putting flowers and other representations of nature around their loved one. There's silky and soft and billowy fabrics and beautiful scents and aromas, when you anoint the body and music that you can play. And I can imagine it's such a relief for the nervous system for this family that's undergoing tremendous grief.
I love that you put it in that way. Absolutely right. And just the evoking of the senses, right? And there's the way that we know experiences live in our body and in our senses. And that's such a beautiful gift for the family to take with them. And when you're talking about the fabrics, we shroud all of our residents in very simple, basic pure white linen. So it's very, very beautiful. And we do that intentionally because we have sashes, right, that are part of the shrouding ceremony where we tie sashes around 3 or 4 places. And then we have a whole collection of vibrant colored sashes, solid colors or prints, a huge variety, and that we invite family members or even sometimes the resident before they pass to pick the colored fabric that they would like to be used for the sashes. And so for again, it's another opportunity for hands-on engagement and empowerment to be a participant, not a spectator. And so, for example, a recent death at the Lily House was a man who worked his entire life in the concrete trade, and after retirement, even moved into being a concrete artist. And so some fabric that we happened to have was a beautiful like cement gray solid color, and when the children adult children saw that, they just burst into tears because they it was like, oh, this is the color of cement, and they picked that, and there was meaning behind that, and it was so beautiful. And I never, if I'd looked at that gray, I was like, oh, gray, I want something bright and colorful, but for this family it was perfect.
Each experience can be so bespoke and personalized to that individual.
Yes.
So Don, I can't help but wonder, like, how did you come to do this kind of work? I mean, what drew you to doing this for families and for your community?
Oh, thank you. Well, a couple of things. I mean, one, my mom died suddenly many years ago when I was in my late 20s. So I didn't do this work immediately after that loss, but it's safe to say that it really changed my orientation to life and to death. And so it's kind of lived within me for a long time. But more recently, I had an experience of a good friend who died suddenly of a grand mal seizure, and she had very detailed directives for her after death care, which included kind of all the things that we're talking about, you know. And I was a friend in the friend circle that helped to do that. I had never been in the presence of a deceased person before, let alone bathing, washing, dressing, shrouding. And I just did that like I had been doing it my whole life. And I was very aware of how comfortable I was in that moment. And I was like, wow, fancy that. Who knew? And so shortly there, and there were some other experiences with Linda's after death care that were equally moving, but it really inspired me to start just doing hospice volunteering. And then the most direct thing that led to this founding of the Lily House was as a hospice volunteer, seeing and learning the fact in our culture, in our country, the majority of us, 80% of us, are dying in hospitals, nursing homes, long term care facilities, often at the risk of dying alone in busy environments with bright lights. And I live in a small community on the edge of the world on the tip of Cape Cod, and I saw too many people dying alone, with TV blaring. And it's not like they weren't getting good care per se, but it was not specialized care to bear witness, hold space, walk them on that journey of end of life. They were on hospice. Hospice comes in and out, and that's excellent care. But as we know, that's not 24/7 care, which is why most people aren't dying at home, because we don't have the conditions and support for a death at home experience. So anyway, it was truly, I just like, oh, this is not okay. And it was a community need and a community, okay, well, what's the community solution? I just said, oh, we need a community hospice home for folks so we can die, help each other die. I feel like my experience where I live is that we do a really great job of caring for each other in life, showing up, supporting each other, right? We've got all kinds of community support. And I was like, okay, this is an opportunity for us to show up together and support each other in death and do that as community. And that's where the vision came. And I have to share that this was in spring of 2019 where this vision came to me. And I had no idea what that meant. Community hospice home, how do you do it? I don't even know. I don't have a clue. I was working as an arts administrator, nonprofit arts administrator. So I reached out to a friend of mine who's a hospice nurse and said, I have this vision. Do you want to do this with me? She said, yes. I went, great. So we literally were doing cold searches, community hospice home, and like seeing what popped up on Google. And lo and behold, Abode popped up. One of the first hits we got from our search. And we clicked on Hannah is the co-founder with me. And we were sitting next to each other on the laptop, and we're like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. This is what we want to do. And like, here it is. And we were looking on the website, and then it said, join us for the Omega Home Network conference. And we're like, what's that? So we clicked on that. And so, as your listeners may know, Abode and Lily House are member homes of this nationwide network of homes like this. And so that year, the annual conference of the network was being hosted here in San Antonio at Abode. This was in May, and the conference was in June. And Han and I said, let's go. So, this is a full circle moment for me. Han and I flew down to San Antonio from Cape Cod, June of 2019. We were here at the house in this very room where I sit now. Mary, who's the executive director now, was the conference coordinator. So she was here at the house giving tours. And I just saw it. I stood here in this house and in the backyard, and I was literally crying because I could see it. And I took the vision that is Abode and I brought it back to the Cape. And voila, 5 years later, we have the Lily House, and I'm invited back to Abode to present on the work we're doing. And I love this exchange of inspiration and community.
That's the way it should be, you
Yeah,
know? There's enough to go around, and I think with something so important as this and poignant and potent, like the fact that we can collaborate, offer the strengths of each other, I mean, that's how it's supposed to work, I believe.
totally. And Abode, in the whole time, in the several years that we were building the Lily House, creating the website, the language, raising money, everything. Abode was one of my North Stars. So every time we got to something that we needed to create or build, we're like, well, how did Abode do it? What did Abode do? And I would call or just go on the website where there's a shared sensibility for how we do what we do between Lily House and Abode, the focus on the contemplative nature of being. We have a culture and values committee at the Lily House, and we really talk a lot about how we do what we do is just as important as what we do.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a cornerstone of both of our organizations is that there's no rush. And I love that you mentioned that at the very beginning of our conversation today is that this after death care and during death care, there's no rush. Everything is important, but nothing is urgent.
Yes, I love that indeed.
I read that you have this philosophy and you consider end of life care as a three-part continuum. And that piqued my interest. And I'm like, oh, I got to ask her but more about that. Like, what is the three-part continuum of end of life care in your world?
In broad strokes, it's, care for when somebody is fully living. And we share that with ABODE too. You said that at the top of the hour here, very intentional about supporting those that we're caring for to live as fully as possible until the time of death. And I was very inspired by that, learning that from ABODE. And we put that right in our name, the Lily House, a community home for living and dying, and holding those equally and simultaneously. So, when someone is living with us at the end of life, before they start their transition into active dying, they're living, right? In whatever parameters that looks like for them. And so, how can we, again, be very intentional about meeting them where they are and supporting them in life? And part of supporting them in life is to support them to contemplate their mortality, right? And so, some people are engaged in a conscious dying more than others, but it doesn't matter. Just meeting from them where they are, living fully. We have parties at the house and dance parties, and we had a hot dog party with a resident who loved hot dogs. We had like 20 different kinds of hot dogs, and live music on the deck. And just that's the first phase. I mean, we're living as fully as possible. And then, as we know, for those of you doing this work, there start to become very clear apparent signs of transitioning, right? Sleeping more, the faraway look, seeing people in the room who've passed before you, breathing can start to change a little bit. And it's like, okay, this person now is moving into transitioning and then moving into active dying. Sleep apnea, the breathe long pauses between the breath. And so what our care looks like then, of course, becomes very different. There's a way that we slow down even more and we start to create sacred space in the room. It's all sacred space all the time, but more intentional to acknowledge the transition and the active dying, and holding space, bearing witness, right? Doing synchronized breathing, hand holding, sitting in silence, providing support, very tender support for family and friends, helping to guide and educate family and friends about this is natural and normal, and what you're seeing is natural and normal, and it's okay. And then, of course, there is the final breath. And we've already talked about staying present and calm and centered during that, and there's no rush. And then all of the after death care things that we've talked about already. So I like to think about it like that and being very intentional of what the care needs are and how we can show up for someone in those three kind of broad stroke categories of the time that somebody's with us at the Lily House.
To me, it's a great model for just how we all should live. I mean, and I think by studying death and contemplating death as a concept, right? It allows us to live more fully. And so then, we should all subscribe to this three-part continuum because it makes each moment sweeter, each moment more intentional, to use your words, and that there's no rush, that we can truly enjoy that whole process of living and dying. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm sure there are challenges in this kind of work, when people hear that you're doing this, there might be some squeamishness. I'm sure there's specific things that occur after the body has died that you need to take into account. And I'm just curious, like, what are some of the challenges that you faced in offering this service?
To kind of be intentional about language, I would say opportunity. I would use the term opportunity rather than challenge. And so for me, always the opportunity is an opportunity of education. So, for example, helping to educate the ambulance drivers who, I'm going back not to after death care, but I'm just thinking, when we first opened the Lily House, and, a lot of our residents come to us straight from the hospital. And then so they're transported over by an ambulance, and they're ETMs. They're used to going fast, 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 like everything's an emergency. And this person is at the end of their life, and they're like, come racing through the house and racing down the hallway and like one, two, three up in it. And the person's on the bed. And we just had to have that experience once. And we're like, oh, okay, this is an opportunity to have a community moment with our EMT transport drivers here, and to take a breath together, that this is not an emergency and we're going to go slow and we're going to be mindful of what's happening here. And what we started doing is that we would be in the house knowing someone's arriving, and we would watch for the ambulance. And as they pulled in, we go out now and we greet our residents even before they're in the house. When they come out of the vehicle on the stretcher, we're right there, and we could just say very calmly, hello, welcome to the Lily House. And we walk with them in up the ramp into the house. And then we ask the ATM personnel to drivers to stop right there, like in the big common space, so that the person can look around, see where they are. We can say again, you're at the Lily House, you're in Wellfleet. We're so happy to have you with us. We're going to go down the hall to your room now. And that at first the EMTs were like, like, what are we doing here? Why are you making us
I
stop?
gotta go. Yeah.
But now they're so appreciative, and they're like, they come in and they're like, and they take their time and they stop. And then we go into the room. And again, we pause and they look around the room. And then, we have a few minutes before like the one, two, three onto the bed. And that was a great opportunity. And now I think because we slowed down together, that we are having our staff and our volunteers now have relationships with these EMT professionals and the transport drivers, right? We have a relationships because we were moving slow enough to have an interpersonal connection.
It's probably the EMT people's favorite part of the day.
Yeah.
Oh, good, I get to go to Lily House
Yeah,
today.
we're always giving them
Ah,
food and drink, like snacks to
right.
take with them. And then similarly on you're right. And same with the people who deliver all of our equipments, the bed and the oxygen tank and everything like that. And then on the flip side too with the funeral home staff, they're used to coming in and moving pretty quickly too. I mean, even though of course, they have a very quiet presence, they too are like chop chop, and it's like, we're going to hand carry, and they're like want to just wheel the stretcher down the hallway, and it's like, nope, we're going to leave the stretcher here, we're going to walk slowly, we're going to hand carry, and we're not going to use the zip up bag. This is a human experience, so it's been great opportunities to be in community together.
It probably has this ripple effect in the community too, where, families who come with their loved ones and they receive the services, but also just all the people you touch, from the emergency drivers to the people who deliver the equipment.
Yeah, and when you said, "Oh, they must love coming to the Lily House," that made me think too, something that I didn't even know to anticipate beforehand is what a respite the Lily House would be for our hospice partners, the hospice nurse, the home health aide, the social worker, right, who are all day moving and going from place to place and home to home, or a hospital, a nursing home, and on the go and eating in their car, and then they get to come to the Lily House. And I'm sure it's the same here at Abode. And you walk through the door and it's an environment of calmness and peace and serenity, unless there happens to be a hot dog party happening. And then they just sit and they, like, I'm just going to type my notes, do my note taking here, and that it's a respite in their day.
Yeah, it's such a gift on so many levels. And it just warms my heart to know that this exists outside of San Antonio too. I mean, we're really happy with what we've created at Abode, and that it's inspired you to create something that's also unique and its own service and its own place, but that it shares a lot of the same tenets and values that Abode does. What has all of this taught you about your life and life in general?
One thing that you already mentioned, and lots of people mention this, but it's really true, is that when you contemplate death and mortality, and let alone like helping people die every day, there's a way that it really does improve your quality of living. And for years, I kind of every book about death and dying talks about it, and I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a very intellectual idea, but I tell you what, if any of your listeners that are not doing hospice work but are interested, please know that it's a real thing. And I'll never forget the day that I palpably felt it in my body that I was living differently and thinking about how I was living differently as a direct result of contemplating mortality and helping people at end of life. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is no longer an intellectual idea, but an actual lived experience. One other thing that just comes to mind, we're talking so much about, you know, taking your time and slowing down. Oh my gosh, what I have learned, I mean, again, intellectually, I know concepts of time are just that. It's a human construct, time. But when you're helping people at end of life every day, and particularly when they're in a transition or active dying phase, all concepts of time and space fall away. And in fact, we had one resident who wore a watch all the way through her final breath for whatever reason. She liked having her watch on. And in a like the day or two before she died, she looked at her watch and she had a very wry sense of humor. And then she just looked up at me and she said, and she pointed to, she's like, this is meaningless to me. And it's true, like all constructs of time fall away. So there's a way that it has expanded again in some kind of deep psychic sense almost, that time is infinity. There's no beginning, there's no end. And what comes before or after, I don't know. But just knowing that time is much more spacious and unbounded than we know. And some for I can't really put more words into it than that, but it has expanded my experience of time. And then kind of an obvious but true, always we're saying love, right? It's all about love and everything else falls away. It doesn't matter. Nothing else matters except expressions, giving an exchange of love, giving and receiving, completely unconditional love.
All you need is love.
I know
That's for
it's such a
sure.
cliche, but it's so true.
No,
It's so true.
hey, the Beatles were on to something. That's for sure.
Caring for someone at the end of their life, and particularly when they're actively transitioning and dying, right, is it's such a one-pointed experience, right? Just like, a formal meditation practice or a formal art making practice or high level sports, or any level of sports, right? When you're doing something that requires your full one-pointed singular attention, there's a way that you go into that space and then you come out of that space and energized and calm and rejuvenated. People, it's the misconception that, oh, that must be so sad and depressing and dreary and like, oh. And I was like, everyone who does this work knows that certainly it can be sad. There's can be a lot of grieving. And at the same time, it's so full of joy and lightness and happiness and renewed appreciation for existence itself.
Yeah, a lot of gratitude to do this work, and it just kind of busts everything wide open.
Yes.
That's what I found. It's just so we're getting towards the end of our conversation together, but I'm excited because I get to see more of you tonight during our event. But I like to ask all of our guests the following few questions. Dawn, tell us a little bit about how you fill your cup. How do you take care of yourself when you're doing this work?
Let's see, by traveling as much as I can, and particularly to warm climates. I'm very happy to be in San Antonio. And I do live at the beach. And so even though my beach time is very seasonal, the biggest way that I fill my cup is with a book at the beach all day. practically sun up to sundown.
That's the dream right there. If people want to know more about Lily House and the work that you do there, what's the best way for them to reach you or find out more?
Thank you. Go to our website, please, at thelilyhouse.org. And it's Lily, Lily, all one word, thelilyhouse.org. And you can sign up for our newsletter if you want to follow what we're doing.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well so people can make sure to check it out. And finally, because our podcast is called Before You Go, what's one thing that you want to do before you go, Dawn?
Oh, it's kind of an extension of what fills my cup. I want to always spend more time in nature. And really, for me, it's nature in a warm climate.
Yeah. Last week in San Antonio wasn't so warm. You hit the good week here.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, Dawn, it has been such a delight talking to you, and I look forward to learning more about the work that you do and just continuing our friendship and our relationship together between Lily House and Abode. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you so much.
This episode is brought to you by Abode's Death Cafe. Our objective is to increase awareness of death with a view to helping people make the most of their finite lives. To learn more about Death Cafe, go to abodehome.org. Wasn't that amazing? And to think that she was inspired by Abode. I mean, that's the reason why Lily House exists, is because she found us on the internet. And she's like, they are doing what I dreamed of. And I always think, there's enough room for all of us when we're doing important work like this and we're helping people and we're learning more about ourselves, becoming more and more comfortable with our own mortality, thus allowing ourselves and others to live more fully. The more, the merrier. I mean, my goodness. So if any of you want to start a house like Abode or Lily House, give me a call. Reach out to me, because that's one of my passions, is to make sure that we continue this idea. It's almost like a movement. How can we really honor people as they pass and at the same time celebrate our life while we're living it? So before I go, I definitely want to put in my advance directives to have a shrouding ceremony. And it would be so cool if Dawn could lead it. I want to be wrapped in like really wild fabrics and patterns. You probably know, like, I love patterns and different textures and things. So something that's colorful, vibrant. I want a lot of flowers around me. I want the Beatles played in the background as people are anointing me and bathing my body. And so I want to put all that down in an advance directive, and I want to assign that to Dawn so that she can do that for me after I go, and I'll decide before I go. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Before You Go, the official podcast of Abode Contemplative Care for the Dying. At Abode, we believe death is not a medical event, and we are not medical professionals. We're just sharing our opinions, and these opinions shouldn't be taken as medical advice. You can find us online on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. This episode was edited by Make Your Day Richer.